Joining us right now, Florida Congressman, House Freedom Caucus member Ron DeSantis. Congressman, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So should we be talking about infrastructure? Should this administration be looking to tackle infrastructure when we know health care and tax reform are facing some big roadblocks right now?
I think you can walk and chew gum at the same time, and it's interesting what the president's focused on with infrastructure, with both this executive order and then an event he did, I think, about 8 weeks ago, is focusing on the bureaucracy and the red tape, which, you know, we can appropriate money for infrastructure in Washington, but if it gets chewed up with endless environmental reviews, red tape, bureaucracy, then a lot of that money doesn't even get on target, and by the time it does, it takes forever. So I think him targeting that is really good. I think you would see a major improvement in how we do infrastructure if we can dramatically streamline the permitting and the bureaucratic processes involved with it.
So before we get to that, though, in terms of tax reform, can you walk us through where you see the big debates happening around tax reform? Is it basically what deductions stay and go?
Well, we've talked before, Maria. I think the biggest initial debate has been solved, and that's to remove the border adjustment tax. I fought for that for months. A couple of my other colleagues were very vocal. That was removed at the end of July. So I think that clears the way to do something. Obviously, there's going to be different deduction and credits that are going to be discussed, the rates. We got to get, I want as low as possible on both the business and individual side. But I'm optimistic that the House will pass tax reform, both on the business and individual side. I'm not quite as optimistic at what will happen in the Senate, just because I think the health care failure was so spectacular, where you actually had 6 Republican senators who had voted for the repeal bill last Congress vote against it this Congress. So it's hard for me to predict how that body is going to process it, but the House will get it done.
Congressman, when you return, you're going to have 12 working days to address the debt ceiling, which Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said needs to be raised by the end of September, and he's urging Congress to do it without any strings attached. So let me just ask you straight out, will you vote to raise the debt ceiling without any strings attached when you get back?
Well, it's interesting, the 12 working days, we just gave back 5 weeks. I mean, we should be working on this stuff now in Washington. I think the debt limit, it's kind of the smoke alarm to tell us, hey, there's a fiscal fire here, address it. So I think we have to address our underlying fiscal situation in conjunction with the debt ceiling. We've been promising the American people we would do that for an awful long time, and I think it's very reasonable when we're $20 trillion in debt to say, hey, how can we do a course correction so that we're on a better fiscal path going forward?
I want to ask you again, will you vote to raise it without any strings attached?
I want fiscal reforms included with the debt limit.
So is that a no?
That's been my position since I've been in the Congress.
All right.
Congressman Amy Holmes here. The chairman of the Freedom Caucus, Congressman Meadows from North Carolina, he told the Hill newspaper that he thinks that there needs to be a change in strategy from Republican leadership, and that he's perfectly willing to work with conservatives and moderates and everyone in between. Do you think that as Congress is trying to tackle these very thorny issues when it comes to either raising the debt limit or tax reform or even infrastructure, that we might see some bipartisanship breaking out on Capitol Hill?
I think it's unlikely on kind of the big ticket items, the health care, the taxes. You may see some on the infrastructure. Some of the stuff with the debt, I think probably will be bipartisan, because I think what they do is they wait till the last minute and then they just cobble together a grotesque package that passes the buck to future generations. I think that's probably the most likely outcome, unfortunately.
But unfortunately, didn't we see with the repeal and reform effort that if you don't have a single Democrat, particularly in the United States Senate, if you don't have a Democrat on the Republican side, you're not getting the work of the people done?
So what I would have done, I think looking back, we should have done the repeal bill in January, repeal only. And then if Trump signed that when he first took office, then when you start talking about how do you replace it, I think you could have probably gotten some Democrats, depending on which reforms were up for debate. As long as the repeal was part of it, you lose every Democrat vote. But I don't think you can say that we're not going to repeal, because that was kind of the central promise that we had made the American people. And with health care, I would also say there is going to be talk of kind of bipartisan, quote, stabilization of the insurance markets. Understand what that means. That's going to mean shoveling money at the insurance companies. That is not going to solve the problem of why the markets are deteriorating. That'll be papering over the problem. So, yes, you probably will have some Republicans join with a lot of Democrats on that, but that will not actually solve the underlying problem.
So do you see any Democrat support in terms of tax reform? Do you expect you'll get any Democrats to vote on tax reform?
I wouldn't count on it, but I think we probably can get some, particularly on the business side. But it is not going to be like 1986 where you got 90 votes in the Senate. It's just not going to happen. I think their party's approach to tax reform is more informed by people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who really view high tax rates as an instrument of social justice, and they're focused more on that rather than good economic policy. So I wouldn't bet on getting a certain number of Democrats, but I think once this thing starts going, you may be able to pick up some.